You don't choose when the lesson arrives. It chooses you, usually when you're not ready. It sneaks in, through a sentence you overhear, through a silence you didn't expect, through a moment so small you almost miss it. That's how it happened to me. I wasn't looking for anything, just moving, just doing, just existing. Then, a pause. No warning, no reason, just a sudden stillness in the middle of noise. It didn't feel like magic. It felt uncomfortable, like someone had turned down the volume of the world and turned up the sound of my own thoughts, the thoughts I'd been avoiding. At first, I resisted. I wanted to scroll, to stand, to move, anything but be here. But the moment stayed. It had weight, like it knew something I didn't. And then it whispered, not in words, but in feeling. Pay attention. I didn't understand. Pay attention to what? Nothing was happening. But that's the thing. Nothing was happening. And I couldn't remember the last time I let that be enough. The lesson didn't give answers. It gave presence. I noticed the hum of the room, the way the light bent across the floor, the way my chest rose and fell, slower than before. It was as if the world had been speaking all along, and I'd just been too loud to hear it. And in that stillness, I realized something that made my throat ache. I'd been living like life was somewhere else, somewhere later, somewhere better. But the lesson was here, right now, in this unremarkable, ordinary moment that felt more real than any big moment I could remember. I didn't want it to end, but I knew it would. And before it slipped away, it left me with a truth I couldn't unhear. When you're ready, I'll be back. It didn't come back the next day, or the day after. I almost convinced myself it had been nothing. Life got loud again, lists to complete, messages to answer, promises I never meant to make but kept making anyway. I fell back into motion, fast, unthinking, breathing just enough to keep going. But then, without warning, it returned. Not in my room this time, not in stillness, in the middle of movement. I was walking down a busy street, cars, footsteps, conversations passing by in pieces. And suddenly, it was there. That same weight in the air, that same slowing of the world. I knew it before it spoke. Look closer. I tried to keep walking, but my eyes started catching details I'd never noticed. The reflection of clouds in a puddle, the way someone's laugh cut through the noise, a small leaf caught on a shoe, traveling somewhere it didn't belong. None of it was important, and yet, it was, because I wasn't just seeing it, I was in it, completely. And that's when I realized, the lesson wasn't only about stillness, it was about presence, anywhere, even in chaos. I slowed my steps. I let the noise happen without taking it in. And in the middle of that crowded street, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Space. Not around me, inside me. It was like the noise had been in my chest all along, and now, it was moving out. I wanted to hold on to it. But the moment wasn't mine to keep. It came to show me something, and then it would leave. Before it did, I felt the whisper again. You don't have to wait for perfect silence to hear yourself. It landed hard, because I'd been waiting, telling myself I'd feel better when the work slowed down, when I had more time, when the world calmed. But that's not how life works. The world doesn't calm. You do. I stopped at a corner and just stood there, letting people pass, letting the lessons sink in. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing to the next thing. I was here. Exactly here. When I finally moved again, nothing around me had changed. But I had. Slightly. Quietly. Enough to notice. The lesson didn't follow me home. It didn't need to. It had planted something. Something that would grow in its own time. And as I reached my door, I realized it would come again. Not when I called it, but when I needed it most. It didn't take long to notice something. The visits weren't random. They came when I was on the edge of forgetting myself. Not in the big moments, not in obvious crises, in the small ones. The ones I would usually step over without thinking. Like the afternoon I was working, eyes burning from the screen. I told myself I'd finish one more task, just one more. But then my hand froze above the keyboard. That familiar shift in the air, that pause that isn't mine. Check in. 2 words. Not loud, not urgent. But they landed deeper than any deadline ever could. I leaned back in my chair, felt the stiffness in my neck, the dryness in my mouth, the way my breath had been shallow for hours. It was embarrassing, how much I'd been ignoring. My body had been speaking all day, but I'd only been listening to the clock. The lesson didn't shame me, it just waited, like it knew I would see it if I stayed still long enough. So I did. And in that stillness, I remembered something important. Every time the lesson appeared, it wasn't telling me to add something. It was telling me to remove the noise, remove the rush, remove the story that I'm only valuable when I'm producing. I sat there, not working, not fixing, not planning, just breathing. And for a few minutes, the world didn't need me to do anything. It just needed me to be. That realization felt heavier than I expected. Because if that was true here, in this small moment, maybe it was true everywhere. I thought about how many times I'd pushed through exhaustion, how many times I'd said yes when my body was begging me to say no, how often I'd ignored the signs because I thought rest was something you earned. The lesson didn't try to erase my history. It just asked me to stop repeating it. So I made a quiet promise, not to be perfect, not to always listen, but to notice sooner. And maybe to answer sooner. When the moment passed, I didn't feel lighter. I felt steadier, like I'd put something important back where it belonged. The rest of the day went on like normal, meetings, emails, the usual noise. But underneath it all, there was this thread. A small, steady reminder. I'll be here when you start to forget again. It started happening more often, not every day, not on a schedule, but enough that I began to expect it. The interruptions were never dramatic. They didn't stop the world. They just stopped me. Like the morning I was rushing out the door, one shoe on, coffee in my hand. Halfway to the street, I froze. No sound, no warning, just that stillness again. Slow down. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a shift. Like someone had tilted the floor beneath me, just enough to make me notice. I set the coffee down, tied the other shoe, looked out the window for a few seconds longer than I had time for. The street looked exactly like it always did. And yet, it didn't. Every movement, every sound felt sharper. The world was the same size, but somehow I was bigger inside it. Later that week, it happened again. This time in the middle of a conversation I didn't want to have. I was nodding, smiling, saying all the right words. And then, silence. Not from them. From me. The lesson didn't speak in sentences this time. It spoke in a question. Do you mean any of this? The answer was no. And I realized how often I filled the air with words I didn't mean, just to keep things smooth, just to avoid being seen too clearly. So I stopped talking. Let the pause stretch between us. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. They looked at me, waiting for more. I didn't give it. And for the first time in that relationship, I felt like I was actually there. These interruptions, they weren't about fixing my life. They were about returning me to it. Sometimes that meant slowing my body. Sometimes it meant slowing my mouth. Sometimes slowing my mind. The more I noticed them, the more I realized they weren't random. They came when I was on autopilot, when I was about to lose myself in speed or noise or pretending. It was like the lesson was mapping my blind spots, finding every place I disappeared without realizing it, and pulling me back before I went too far. By the end of that month, I wasn't just waiting for it to appear. I was leaving space for it. Little gaps in the day, moments with no music, no phone, no conversation. Not because I was trying to summon it, but because I wanted to be findable. And the more I practiced being findable, the more often it found me. It happened quietly. No big announcement. No moment that felt like a finish line. One morning, I realized the lesson hadn't needed to interrupt me for a while. Not because it was gone, because I was already doing the thing it had been teaching me to do. I was slowing without being told, pausing without needing permission, listening before reacting. The first sign was in my mornings. I woke up and didn't reach for my phone right away. I let the room exist before I filled it with noise. I let myself exist before I filled myself with other people's lives. The second sign was in my conversations. I was saying fewer words, but meaning more of them. And when I didn't have something real to say, I let the silence stand. I didn't rush to cover it anymore. The third sign was in my own mind. I noticed when it was speeding. I could feel when I was about to disappear into worry, and I could pull myself back before I was gone. That's when I understood. The lesson wasn't just something that visited. It was something I could carry, not like a constant thought, more like muscle memory, a quiet reflex that made it harder to lose myself for long. Life didn't stop throwing noise at me. It never will. But the noise no longer decided who I was that day. And here's the part I didn't expect. Other people noticed. They didn't know what had changed, but they felt it. They leaned in more when I spoke. They slowed down when they were with me. It was as if my stillness was contagious. I wasn't trying to teach anyone. But the lesson, it doesn't only stay with you. It leaks out. It moves through you into the spaces you touch. That's when I started to see it differently. Maybe the point wasn't just for me to receive it exactly when I needed it. Maybe the point was for me to pass it on, exactly when someone else needed it too. I used to think the lesson was rare, a gift that only came in perfect conditions. Now I know it's always here. It's just quieter than the rest of life. Most people never hear it, not because they can't, but because no one told them how to listen. One day, I saw someone sitting alone on a park bench, phone in hand, scrolling fast, like they were running from something they couldn't name. I recognized it, the same kind of escape I'd lived in for years. I didn't speak to them. I just sat on the bench across from theirs. No phone, no hurry, just there. It took a while, but eventually they noticed me, noticed the stillness, and for a few seconds, they stopped scrolling. They didn't smile, didn't say a word, but I could see it in their eyes. They felt the pause. It wasn't mine to explain. The lesson never is. It arrives when it's ready. When you're ready. All you can do is make space for it. In yourself. Around yourself. So that when someone else is searching, they might find it in your presence. I think that's what it's been trying to teach me all along. That lessons aren't meant to be hoarded. They're meant to be lived out loud, so others can feel them without you ever having to speak. Now, I don't wait for the lesson to find me. I live in a way that makes it easier to hear, and easier for others to hear it too. It still arrives at the exact moments I need it most. But sometimes, it arrives for someone else, and I just get to hold the space while it lands. That's when I know I've learned it. Not because I have it memorized, but because I've become it. And maybe one day, someone will notice my stillness the way I noticed theirs. And they'll feel that same whisper I once heard. Pay attention.